Runewars has been discontinued, but is now the time to buy in? That's the duality. That's the question. This is what I'm kind of thinking here in the moment. And in many ways, was it doomed to fail from the beginning? Was it just a matter of time? So let's explore a couple of ideas here and a couple of possibilities, because now there's a brief window for some decisions to be made. A lot of people, when it was released, kind of looked at the gaming system and said it was doomed to fail for two primary reasons. And much like D&D 4.0, I don't think it was marketed correctly, and I think that hurt it tremendously. A lot of feedback that I got from fellow board gamers and also wargamers was that Terranoth is like boring. It's too generic. And I would counter that and say, being a Runebound enthusiast, Descent First Edition, Second Edition, some of the campaign books, it does have a history. It does have a lot of well-established lore. But the problem is it's only Fantasy Flight's lore. It's not supported by movies, books, outside media. It's not like it's Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Warhammer 40,000, where you have the core IP, but you have these other orbits of stuff constantly pulling people in. And second to that, having your own IP isn't bad. Your own fantasy universe isn't bad. But Fantasy Flight is focusing on other titles aggressively. They're not pouring everything into Terranoth and saying, we're going to make this our flagship. So I just felt like it didn't get the love and the traction from that perspective. Second was, in my opinion, was the fact that you had to build and paint your own stuff. And from a wargamer, that's no problem. But for someone that's into board gaming, that's a big first step. That really is. Now you're like, well, Fritz, what about Legion? Yeah, but that's Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars is completely irrelevant. But yes, that's Star Wars. You know, this is, and it is supported by Fantasy Flight, although they seem to be pulling back a little bit on Armada and pulling a little bit back on Legion. And I don't know if that's just the start of the new year as of this podcast, or if something else is going on. But for a miniatures war game to not be pre-painted and selling it to a board game audience in a generic fantasy setting, that's a lot of what ifs. That's a lot of hurdles. Yeah, you could play unpainted, but the whole idea behind a war game is to have the narrative and have it painted. So I feel like it was just, when it was first released, I think about 2 years ago, I was intrigued because I like Terranoth. I love war games. I have a variety of systems, some well-known, some not so well-known, but I just felt like it didn't have the long-term traction. So here we are, up on Miniature Market and other places. It's literally just being liquidated. And I'm thinking, is now the time to buy in? Is now the time to buy in? So a couple of considerations, and then we'll turn it over to you guys in the comments and the feedback. So if you could buy all the models, all the factions, I mean, you got a lot of work ahead of you. Yes, you still got to build and paint it. But essentially, if you can buy an entire wargaming system for like 80% off, that's a lot of product. And then you have a wargaming system, even if it's been discontinued, it's still playable. And you can get together with some friends and pick your factions and play it out. So that's intriguing with the discount rate being so high. Second to that is the miniatures. The miniatures themselves are kind of interesting. There's some good sculpts on there. What if I take the miniatures, because the buy-in and the factions and everything are so cheap right now, play it with Kings of War. Play it with some other rule set on there. I mean, you could use the Fantasy Flight rule set, but you could equally use these miniatures for other wargaming systems. Because again, it's going to be a massive amount of models. You know, you get a unit for like $4. That's crazy. Pushing that out there, complete system, play it with Fantasy Flight, play it with Kings of War, play it with some type of wargaming system. A lot to consider. And then finally, separating the models, just the raw models from the war game, and now using it for D&D, using it for board games, using it for other aspects, just on the physical product alone, to have it such a reduction. That's what's intriguing me. And the only thing is this window where as things get discontinued and stock gets liquidated and it does get purchased and go away, or it just gets trashed, at some point it'll be too hard to acquire everything or most of everything. So that buy-in is, I don't want to say like in the next like month or two, but it's happening right now where there's still a lot to be purchased for so little. So although it's discontinued, I find with major wargaming systems, when this happens, like, there are some considerations because there's a lot of product for discounted prices that honestly we're never really going to see again. So your thoughts on that, and just out of curiosity, in the comments, in the feedback, questions, did you buy into it? Runewars. Did you think about it? Were you tempted about it? And if you did buy into the system, what are your plans moving ahead? Finish off 2 armies, finish off a couple of models, and then shelve it and play it every now and then? Or honestly, is now the time to get more aggressive?